Now, earlier I was talking about the emotional body, and I kind of wanted to give a small map, if you will, about the bodies. And I won't get too esoteric because I truly don't understand all of them. I feel like understanding comes from experience, and I haven't experienced enough of the bodies to really say this is this and this is that. But I know enough about the three initial bodies that I could try to talk about those. So I got the three bodies as emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies. Now you have the causal body, you have the astral body, you have other bodies as well. But these three bodies kind of incorporate those as well. I want to start with the emotional body, which every time I put the emotional body, I put it as a circle under two circles. It's the lowest circle. And the emotional body, trying to put it into words is kind of complex. Well, all of this stuff is really complex, actually. But to try to make it understandable to myself, the emotional body is what we feel, well, when we feel. It's the part of us that holds a certain type of intelligence that doesn't have words or doesn't have pictures. It just has a force. And this force that we feel in our day-to-day lives from moment to moment, this force can either drag us down or keep us afloat or make us float above. And it's very difficult understanding how you feel about certain things because the emotional body is linked very much to the mental body. And I always draw the mental body right above the emotional body. And the reason why I put it above is because our emotions by themselves is just energy that we're feeling. And I think sometimes it manifests as like anxiety or depression. But it's because those emotions that we're feeling and the external factors that are making us feel the anxiety or depression, we haven't allocated a mental space for them. Like, we don't really know what it is. So within the mental body is when the emotions draw up and then they coalesce into a pocket. And in that pocket, we either make a decision to where we unpack it or where we compartmentalize it and push it away. Now, to be honest with you, we all compartmentalize things and push it away and say we'll deal with it another time, especially in high stress situations when you need to make a life decision that will change your life. But when we do get those times of silence and those things do pop up back in our mind, it can draw back the emotion and we can feel that emotion all over again. But now thoughts are starting to come to us. Now, sometimes these thoughts aren't pleasant. And these thoughts in our mental body comes within maybe pictures or maybe just thoughts. And these thoughts or pictures gives us the overall experience as our emotional mental bodies are communicating. And it's telling us we should do this or we should do that. But that necessarily isn't the correct understanding of the communication between the two bodies. Because in order to really understand our emotions, we have to step outside of our mental body and into our spiritual body. And I always draw the spiritual body circle above the mental body and above the emotional body. And the reason why we can't use our mind to understand our emotions is because our minds are not disciplined to the degree they need to be able to separate our emotions. So we have to lean into our spiritual body. Now, all this seems like kind of like strange because it's like you're saying a lot of words, but it's not really making sense. And since I think that, it's probably what you're thinking as well. So let's try to put it all together. The spiritual body, how it looks in our life sometimes is religion or things that we do in faith, like meditation, going to church, burning sage, aromatherapy, physical yoga or karma yoga. And that is how we cope with the things that we feel in our emotional body that gives the force in the mental body to give us an experience of an overall how we're feeling. But it's technically not how we're feeling. It's only that moment in time. It's just that moment in time that that this force has come up that makes us feel this way. And in our spiritual body, we practice things like meditation, like aromatherapy or yoga, to be able to take on the stresses. But we don't oftentimes read like we're supposed to, because reading like we're supposed to, whether it be the Upanishads or the Bible or the Quran or the Gnostic scriptures or the Tao Te Ching or the Bhagavad Gita, that gives us the clarity of mind to be able to separate our emotions so we can stand in our spiritual body and make a decision. Now, when I say spiritual body, a lot of people will automatically assume you're in this invisible body and you're outside of yourself, which in one instance is true, but on a lot of instances in our day-to-day lives, that's not really what the spiritual body is. The spiritual body, in this instance I'm talking to, is, let's say, the lowest form of the spiritual body. So if the spiritual body was an onion, this would be the most outer layer. And in this most outer layer is our religion or our practices in faith. And that practice in faith is what gives us mental clarity in order to sift through our emotions and clarify them or purify them. The mental body is a very strange plane. And I call it a plane of existence, but I wouldn't describe it as a plane. It's more like a world. But I wouldn't describe it as a world either. I would describe it more like a solar system. But it's really not like a solar system either. It's more like a galaxy. But it's really not like a galaxy either. It's more like a universe. But it's really not like a universe. It's more like a realm. But it's really not really like a realm. It's really like a multiverse. But it's really not like the multiverse. It's really like nothing. And the reason why I say it like that is because the mental body is so vast that you could live in the mental body for 1,000 years in complete clarity of the mental state, and you would not experience everything the mind has to offer, because the mind is equal to Earth in the sense that our physical body on Earth is similar to the mental body in the totality of everything. And that may sound really confusing, so let me back up. So as a human being, we have three states, three natural states, I would say. You have your emotional state, your mental state, and your spiritual state. Now, each individual one on its own is just like that. It's on its own. Emotions on its own is similar to a deva. It's just force. Not that it's just force, but I'm equating it to just force for explanation. The mental body on its own is just space. Not that it's just space, but just for the moment. And the spiritual body on its own is just totality of everything. But when you have the totality of everything mixed in with space, mixed in with force, you have something very peculiar. It's an alchemical mix. And that chemical mix we describe as the human experience or consciousness. Now, emotions have consciousness, just like the mental and spiritual bodies have consciousness. But all three of them together make a certain consciousness. And that consciousness is the ego, egoic consciousness. And that egoic consciousness is what allows us to be perceptive of the emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies. So when the ego is perceiving through the mind forces from the emotions, it creates a reality of its own so it could understand what is happening within the spiritual body. The spiritual body, people think, is this pure thing, which in the highest case it is. But as humans, the spiritual body is not dead, but it's not illumined like it can be. And it's not illumined like it can be because within our evolution, we had to climb up through the emotional body into the mental body. And then the mental body had to make way into the perception of awareness of the spiritual body. So the spiritual body, although it is pure, in our perception within the ego, the spiritual body is not pure because in order for the ego to be in a pure spiritual body, it has to purify the mental body. And in order to purify the mental body, it has to be an understanding of the emotional body. And to be an understanding of the emotional body, one of the first things you would have to do is learn how to subdue your emotions. Now, you don't want to subdue your emotions to the point where that's all that there is and you have no emotions. I don't mean subdue as in do away with. I mean subdue as in learn how to make them less. And when you learn how to make your emotions less, it's not that you'll feel less. It's just that you'll give your ego mental clarity to understand where the emotion is coming from. If the force is too strong, if the emotional force is too strong on the mental plane, you won't be thinking clearly. You can't think clearly because there's too much haze. Remember, the mental plane is also the plane of illusions because the mental plane seems like it's the totality of everything. Because like I said, it's space, but it's not the totality of everything. It's just a part of the totality of everything. It's not the complete truth. It's only a part of the truth. But a part of the truth is the illusion. Because if in part of the truth, you can't see the total truth, then it's not the truth. But it masquerades as the truth. Which is why they say like the mind is the devil's playground. But see if I can get back to my thought. So when the ego tries to infiltrate the mental space of the human, or when your ego tries to take control of your mind is going to fight back. Now, your mind's not fighting back because it wants to fight back. Your mind is fighting back because of the emotional force coming from below it and the ego coming from above it is pressurizing it. And that pressurizing of energy, if you don't know how to resolve the energy, is going to explode. So it's going to explode in ways of thinking. And a lot of ways it explodes is in negative thought. Negative thought is probably the precursor to all things good. Because when the ego, when it comes from the higher realms, the ego, the sense of self, the sense of self-awareness comes into the mental body is so vast and dark, and the ego is a shining light, that darkness tries to swallow the light on principle. And it's not swallowing the light because it's evil and wants to snuff out the light of the ego. It's doing that because that's its purpose. So it's kind of like lifting weights. If you only lifted a small amount of weights, you can get very toned and you can build muscle dexterity, but eventually you'll cap out at a certain level. Whether you, well, okay, let me say that again. You won't cap out at a certain level. You'll keep gaining strength, but you won't gain strength at the way you'll gain strength if you lifted heavier weights each time you lifted weights. I say that to say the ego, the shining light, is like the human body, and the mental space of darkness is like the weight. The mental space is the weight upon the ego, and the ego has to push the darkness off of itself to grow stronger. Now, it does that in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways is going into the spiritual body. And this is not the purified spiritual body. This is the actualized divine ego. When you read the Quran, you read the Bible, you read the Upanishads, or you read a spiritual text that you're seeking true enlightenment from, that is the spiritual body I'm talking about. It takes that spiritual light of the divine ego, it passes it to your personal ego and into your mind, and you're able to combat the darkness within your mind. And this is the negative darkness. This is just the pure darkness that the mind is, because the mind is an open slate. So when it goes into the open slate of the pure darkness as a human, and you go through life and you have these forces coming from below, of the emotional forces that are happening because of life circumstances, then the spiritual body's light from the divine ego that's shining into the ego within the mental plane, it's pushing the darkness off in a certain type of way that is reducing karma. Now, this is getting more complicated than I set out to do. So let's go into the mental body and go into karma for a little bit. Then we'll get back to that. So karma is basically like whatever you do, something will happen, right? So if you do something good, good will happen to you. If you do something bad will happen to you. But that's not really accurate to karma. Because karma just says, if something happens, something else will happen, right? So just because you do something good doesn't mean something good will happen to you. Just because you do something bad doesn't mean something bad will happen to you. It doesn't really work like that, because spirit in its totality isn't good or evil. It just is. It's just the totality of things. Excuse me. So within that totality, you have karma. And when you read spiritual text, you gain a little bit of light when you start understanding what the spiritual text is, and you gain a little bit of knowledge. You're able to implement that within your life. Now, when you implement spiritual knowledge within your life, or when your ego takes from the divine ego, or when the divine ego gives light to the ego to pass on into the mental plane to illuminate the plane, your light is pushing the darkness. And when it pushes the darkness is going to do the same thing. It's going to push back because it's an equal force. But with spiritual knowledge pushing the darkness doesn't see it as a force, doesn't see it as an opposite force. It sees it as a force of one. So you push the darkness, and then you convert the darkness into light. So as you're converting darkness into light, you're not producing something in the karmic realm. You're exceeding karma, and you're basically saying, "Hey, I'm not your enemy. I'm with you." And the reflection says, "Oh yeah, you are with me. We're the same. So now let's go in the same direction." So you make that darkness into light. So as you make that darkness into light, now your divine light from the light from the divine ego goes into the ego, into the mental plane. Now you're able to lift a little bit more. So when when emotions come up that are strong emotions, now you're able to be like, okay, that emotion is strong, but it's not as strong as it used to be. So now that it's not as strong as it used to be, I can kind of dissect it. Now, the more and more this happens, the more and more you'll be able to understand where your emotions are coming from, especially within the moments. Now, when something happens in life and like you feel bad about something and then you go home and you think about it, like, damn, I feel really bad about it, that's kind of messed up. That's part of the divine ego light, shedding light within your ego onto the mental plane so that you can see clarity. But meditation tries to get us to the point to where we don't have to go home to realize what we did or didn't do was negative. In the moment, we can make the decision of, hey, this is the best thing I can do. And we're making that decision based off the spiritual body's light of the divine ego that's shedding light onto the ego, and that the ego is being manifested within the mental plane to shine light within that moment to give us knowledge of what to do and the wisdom and how to do it. Oh man, I don't know if that was clear, but I think that's as clear as I can get it. So the human experience, people think it's more advanced than the other beings on the planet, from the minerals to like inanimate objects like cars. And I always use cars because car is a composition of minerals. It's a composition of minerals. It's a composition of earth. And the composition of earth are living consciousness in very small pockets. So I say that I'm saying basic all of this to say that the spiritual body, mental body, and emotional body that make up the human, we aren't that different from everything else. And if we take the time to understand ourselves on an emotional, mental, and spiritual level, then we can understand things around us. Now, to wrap this up, I kind of want to go into the spiritual body for a second to like kind of clarify, because it's kind of hard talking about the spiritual body because people have their own preconceived notions, which I'm not saying are wrong, or I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying people have their preconceived notions. So I want to specify, when I say spiritual body, all I'm really referring to in this instance, unless I say otherwise, is the ability to take a break from your ego, from your lower ego, and tap into your divine ego and say, no matter how I feel in this situation, or what I think I should do in this situation, or how I will be perceived in this situation, what's the best thing to do? And that's what I mean by spiritual body. So when we're having an argument with someone and people are watching, we could easily puff up and, as they coined the term, use your ego to best the other person in an argument. Or you could step back, right? Release the lower ego. Step into the lower light of the divine ego, into your spiritual body, and say, hey, my mind is telling me that these people are going to look at me like I'm weak if I don't act a certain way. And my emotions are telling me that I need to act this way. But I'm not going to act this way because I know this person actually is going through something that's out of their control and they feel powerless. So they need to feel power over me so they can feel better. So I'm going to allow that to happen to a certain point so they can feel better. And then later they would understand subconsciously down the line, karmically, that, hey, that probably wasn't the right thing to do. And in the moment, I'm not going to lie, that's one of the hardest things to do. But as humans, we need to get to the point to where we're able to do that, which is easier said than done, that's for sure.